Great. Well, Damien, we're about out of time. I wanted to share that I think one of the things that endears OK Go to the dance community, beside the relationship to Trish Z, is that you don't use the pedestrian nature of your own movements as an excuse not to polish and commit to the performance. The attention to detail and cleanliness in the execution of your work complements the world-class creativity and design. Dance is an art form and not a sport, and your
That
performance
is a
never.
beautiful way of saying we are in fact terrible dancers, and we don't and we have no shame. We still do it anyways.
Yes, and now you've made a work that endears you to the space community as well by making beautiful, fun, and inspirational imagery available to a broader audience. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for being here today.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye. All right, and thank you to the Thunderbird School of Management's new program for that generous sponsorship. And our next speaker is the incomparable Shelley Brunswick. Shelley Brunswick, COO of Space Foundation, brings a broad perspective and deep vision of the global space ecosystem. From a distinguished career as a space acquisition and program management leader and congressional liaison for the U.S. Air Force to her current role, including overseeing the Center of Innovation and Education, Symposium 365, and Global Alliance. And I do want to highlight that Air Force experience. Really grateful for your service, Shelley, and advocating for space technology innovation, entrepreneurship, diversity, and inclusion. Shelley collaborates with organizations around the world to connect commercial, government, and educational sectors. She actively participates with Women in Aerospace Foundation, Women's Global Gathering, United Nations Space for Women, Women Tech Network, Islamic World Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, World Business Angels Investment Forum, Global Women Leaders Committee, New York University, Women in Global Policy Insights, and the fellowship program there, the USA for Global Policy Insights, the Quad Forum, Space Tourism Society in Africa, where she'll be part of a speaker at the first African Space Week in September, Todayers, Lifeboat Foundation, Manufacturers Edge, and the Colorado Springs Chamber and Economic Development Council. Shelley, we're so grateful you could join us today. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Lee. It's an honor to be joining you and your esteemed audience. And I love participating in Foundation for the Future events. They're so enlightening. And your last guest was just exciting and really illustrated the opportunities that are available. So I always enjoy tuning in as well. So thank you for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to having a great discussion. I did only bring 1,000 PowerPoint slides that I can share. And I'm happy to talk about those, or if you want to just ask questions, I'm happy with that too. So I'm very flexible, and we want to do what's best for your audience and what will make it most entertaining and enjoyable for them.
Yeah, why don't you start with a brief introduction to Space Foundation and the Center for Innovation and Education, and then we can talk from there.
That sounds perfect. So I'm bringing up my slides. So I want to say, can you all see them? Can you see the slides, Lee?
Yes, that looks great.
Perfect. So I'll just kind of walk through a few slides that talk about Space Foundation. What is the space ecosystem? What are space-related technologies? And then what are the career fields? Because many times there's not a baseline for what that means. And so the Space Foundation is very passionate about highlighting what the baseline and how do you get into the space ecosystem. So we believe advocating for innovation is about bettering life here on Earth. And as Lee said in that very long introduction that we're going to cut down before the next time, Lee, there are 3 main divisions at Space Foundation. We have our Symposium 365, which is the premier source for information. And that is, if you know anything about Space Foundation, most people know about our annual Space Symposium that will be taking place in 2 weeks here in Colorado Springs, all COVID safety procedures in place. But we also have a virtual platform called 365 because the space ecosystem runs more than 4 days a year in person. It runs throughout the year, We also have our annual space report and our quarterly space report. You'll be hearing a presentation about that shortly, so I look forward to hearing more on that. So that's really that Symposium 365, your trusted source for information. And then Global Alliance, that's something I was doing this morning. I was on an interview with individuals from the United Arab Emirates. And what we're doing with our Global Alliance is we are your trusted partner, both US as well as internationally, for all space activities. So we put out thought leadership articles about various regions of the world. We're doing webinar series on emerging trends. As Lee was kind enough to highlight, I was invited to speak at the first African Space Week next month. In October, I'll be traveling to Dubai for the Dubai Expo for their Space Week. So the Space Foundation is out there building the partnerships and collaborations, because space is really a global entity and it brings all of us together. And then the division I'm mainly going to talk to you about today is our Center for Innovation and Education. And this is a lifelong learning platform for workforce development and economic opportunity. And again, today's Foundation for the Future theme is workforce development. So this fits squarely into what is not only the workforce of today, but what is going to be the workforce of the future and how do we get there? So I don't want to steal too much thunder because I know you're going to hear a lot more about the space report coming up. But let me just share a few numbers that whet your appetite why space is so exciting. In 2020, the Space Foundation, through our space report, said the global space ecosystem was $447 billion. 80% of that is commercial, meaning products and services, jobs, opportunity, workforce development. And why that number is so important is where it's projected to go. Again, Foundation for the Future. And the future look from Bank of America is that by 2030, the global space ecosystem will be about 1.4 trillion. And then by 2040, it'll be over 3 trillion. So we are seeing exponential growth. And more than 85 countries operate in space, but there are 3 types of countries that are part of the space ecosystem. There are those countries that operate in space. There are those countries that are emerging space countries that are going to operate in space. And then there are countries that are going to take advantage of space technology. So basically what I'm saying is every country and every citizen uses space technology and is part of the space ecosystem. These are some of those technologies we talk about. Obviously, satellite servicing and repair and debris monitoring, removal are probably things you've heard about, but so is virtual reality and manufacturing and healthcare and pharmaceuticals and energy storage solutions. So when you think about space and emerging technologies, they're all interlaid upon each other. They're all part of that space ecosystem. So an example is for data analytics, there's so much information coming off satellites today that we need virtual reality and artificial intelligence to help us process that information coming off satellites quickly and then coordinate and collaborate with the human being that's in the decision-making loop, because a human being cannot process the amount of information. And the information that is going to be coming from sensors, not only in space, but on Earth, is going to grow exponentially. Think about electric vehicles. All of those electric vehicles are a multitude of sensors that are going to be sending their information to help provide real-time data awareness. Is that accidents on the road? Is it your positioning? Is it road conditions? And where is that information going? Is it going to the Department of Transportation so they can fill that pothole? Is it going to the police department because you passed an accident? So as we continue to move in this emerging technology that is perpetually going forward, we are going to have an abundance of data analytics that needs to be done. And again, human beings are not going to be able to process this in a timely manner, and that's where artificial intelligence steps in. Energy and energy storage solutions. I don't want to steal too much from Lee because I know you've had so many great speakers, but we know to go to Mars and the moon, we're not going to be able to use the same solar panels we have now. We need different storage solutions. We need those storage solutions on Earth now. You know, we need to become more sustainable. We need to become carbon neutral. removing carbon, as a matter of fact. And there are technologies that we can get by going to the moon that can benefit us here on Earth. One of them is helium-3, which can help with nuclear energy. That is a solution for carbon reducing emissions and actually getting us to net zero, stopping climate change, and hopefully reversing it. So we need that technology to go to space, but we really need that technology on Earth. And healthcare, as we think about space, we have to slow the aging process because we are leaving Earth's gravity and the atmosphere, the very thin, tiny atmosphere that protects us from radiation. And when we've seen from astronauts that go to space, the aging process increases. One, we suffer from not having a gravity environment with the fluid doesn't know where it's going. It's hard to tell what's up and down because your ears operate on gravity and fluid. Men have a lot of eye trouble because the fluid is all pooling up in the head. Women develop osteoporosis faster because there's no gravity, so our bones become weaker. And there's a myriad of other challenges. So as we think about going to space, we're going to solve those technology challenges and healthcare solutions on Earth. And of course, I could go into 1,000 other items, but for those of you that are watching and are interested in what are some of these technologies, you could go to the NASA Technology Transfer Office, and they have thousands of patents that are waiting to be commercialized in healthcare and energy and agriculture and telecommunications and transportation and more. So if you're interested in being an entrepreneur or know somebody that is, this is a great resource. And I shared some of the technology that has already come from the space program that we utilize every day. One would be the platform we're talking on today. Not possible without space technology and cybersecurity. But we also love our cell phones and can't live without them. And they have 3 different types of space technology: cordless power tools, weather detection. You know, as we're watching climate change, being able to Earth observe what's happening on the planet, preparing individuals so they can prepare for hurricanes or cloud patterns, or as we're getting on airplanes, we want pilots to have the best weather prediction so that they can navigate around turbulence, save fuel, and reduce the time of our travel. Firefighters are greatly appreciative of the fire retardant clothing that came from the space era. And again, we look at formulated food and so many others. So as you think about space technology, you can think about how it's helping us every day. So again, I'm not going to steal too much thunder because you're going to get a great talk about the space report coming up. But the space report is put out by the Space Foundation's R&A team, research and analysis team, and it compiles both an online database as well as quarterly products that highlight different areas of the space ecosystem. And this year, we're actually putting out 2 special editions. So this month in August, we're putting out a special edition before Symposium, and then we're going to put out another special edition in the spring before Symposium in April. But what this shares with you is when you look at the blue and the red, what we're highlighting is 80% of the space ecosystem is commercial, which again is jobs and services and entrepreneurship. And that's not saying the smaller slice of the pie, the government spending, is not contributing to jobs or GDP, but it's a smaller amount. As we commercialize and the government pays for less of this, that means entrepreneurs and the commercialization take over. So we as taxpayers, our money is then spent on other activities that benefit us. So we also talked about what are those career paths. And many times we think about astronauts and launch vehicles, but today, I'm going to say everyone can be part of the space industry. We need astronauts and rocket scientists, but we need project managers and trades workers and manufacturing and artists and entrepreneurs. So the opportunity for everyone to find a career path has never been greater. We also have to look at being lifelong learners because technology is continuing to advance rapidly. Some jobs are going to change and embrace more technology in them. Some jobs may go away and new jobs are going to come online. So we need to make sure that we're going to continue to retool and upskill and tweak our workforce as new jobs come online. And the other area about the space industry is 40 years ago, it was primarily white male. US, primarily government, maybe Russia, China, and a few other countries. Now it is every country. And so in the US, we particularly, as well as globally, want to look at how do we reach underrepresented groups. So we could call them minorities and women, but we'll say underrepresented, because that can include inner cities or rural communities, as well as regions of the world. Lee highlighted, I'll be speaking at a conference in Africa. Well, Africa has 54 countries. Some of them are already operating in space. Some of them want to use space technology. And there's some other groups we partner with. Lee mentioned ISESCO, the Islamic World Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. They have named this the Year of the Woman. So getting more women and diversity into the space ecosystem. So the Space Foundation, we're really passionate about democratization of space and providing pathways for all citizens. In the US, as well as some other countries that have an aging workforce, such as Europe or Japan, China to an extent, we do see a workforce shortage. We have a large baby boomer crowd that is getting ready to retire. And COVID has accelerated this. What we're seeing is where some people thought maybe they're going to work till 60 or 65 or 70, COVID has caused them to reevaluate their priorities. And I'm seeing a lot of friends, so that might tell you how old I am. I see a lot of friends saying, I'm going to get an RV and we're going to travel for a year. Or I have two friends who are colonels in the Air Force that are retiring and they're going to move to West Virginia and they want to spend time with their kids while they're still young. So we're also seeing individuals that are reprioritizing what's most important to them. What that's causing is a workforce shortage. We're seeing that everywhere in the country, but we were seeing this even during COVID. The space industry was still hiring. We also have that skills deficit. As I shared, I have job openings, but I may have individuals that are transitioning out of the hospitality or the entertainment or the cruise industry. And so they're going to need to be reskilled and upskilled to come in and take these jobs. And then again, we have an innovation gap. It's not just thousands of patents at NASA that are waiting to be commercialized. So is the European Space Agency. They have a technology transfer office, as does the Air Force Research Lab and the Department of Energy. So these patents are waiting for entrepreneurs to bring them to market. Many times you can apply for grants to help you do this. That's why the Space Foundation has launched our Center for Innovation and Education. It's all about creating workforce development, because when you're an entrepreneur, you create a job not just for you, but for others, and then you create an ecosystem. So it's workforce development and economic opportunity. So creating that economic growth and then creating the career fields that are directly part of the space ecosystem, but then that also support the space ecosystem. I have numerous teachers here at the Space Foundation. I'm not necessarily sure they're in the space industry proper, like you'd say, are they at SpaceX? But they are certainly part of the space ecosystem in creating that future workforce. So again, students, teachers, entrepreneurs, and professionals have a pathway to be part of the growing space ecosystem. This is how the Space Foundation operates. We look for partnerships with that Global Alliance division. We look for sponsorships and grants. We do fundraising, look for donations and endowments. So we are a 501c3 for education, and we are a US nonprofit that does business internationally. So what I want to really highlight is how do we look at creating that future workforce? And we believe we have a workforce development roadmap that's very successful and tried and tested. And it has 5 steps: awareness, access, training, connecting, and mentoring. The first step is people have to understand that the space industry is for them. That's why these programs today, Foundation for the Futures program, is so important, because it's helping to get the message out that everyone has a way into the space ecosystem. 2 is, what is that access point now? How do you break down the barriers of the perception that space is not for me? And those of us in the space ecosystem, how do we extend a hand to help individuals come into it? And that could be through several of our programs at Space Foundation, whether it's symposium or our space commerce entrepreneurship and leadership programs. our New Gen Young Mentoring, or other programs that are available. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. So we have to create an access point into the space ecosystem. Then it's about training. So although an individual who is transitioning out of the tourism sector wants to come into the space industry, they may need to get some training. Is that formal or informal training? So both are valuable. Formal training is, do you go to International Space University? Or I heard earlier, Lee, with my good friend Greg from Arizona State University and the new master's program that is just fabulous. Or is it informal education? Do you take a program with Space Foundation? Or do you watch some great webinars like Foundation for the Future? So there's a multitude of ways to get educated and informed, formal and informal. There's also entrepreneurs, internship programs, and others. Then you have to build those connections. You participate in events like this, and I'm looking at all your pictures over here on the side, and I say, Alice, I want to get to know Alice more, and I'm going to reach out to her. So I'm going to start building those connections with people that are like-minded in the space industry. It's also partnering with Foundation for the Future and Space Foundation and the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs and Space Generation Advisory Council and Toad Air and all those other organizations that Lee shared that I participate in, because they all create an access point for people to come into the space industry. And last, and many times this is first, is mentorship. Finding a good mentor can help you overcome those other hurdles in that space industry. And there are great mentoring opportunities with Women Tech Network, which, don't let the name fool you, it's open to women and men, as well as the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, Space for Women program, again, open to men and women, Space Generation Advisory Council. And the other thing I share with you, all of you would be great mentors too. So think of it that not only do you want to have a mentor or be a protege, you should be a mentor because you have so much to offer other individuals. So consider being a mentor. This is a little bit how the Space Foundation does business. So you're on the gray dot that says Space Foundation. And the next step is, who is the target audience we want to reach? Is it K through 12 students or entrepreneurs or small businesses or professionals? So we really want to hone in on who is the target audience we're trying to help. Then the next step is, what is the goal? What is the goal or measure of success with that help? Is it networking? Is it career upskilling, immersive experiences? And then once we understand the target audience and the goals and objectives, then we look around the sphere of Space Foundation programs to determine, can we deliver and meet all those goals and objectives as the Space Foundation singularly alone? Or do we want to partner with another university like Greg at ASU or ISU, or we're partnering with CSU Pueblo or other organizations like Foundation for the Future to deliver a comprehensive program that meets all the goals and objectives. The biggest takeaway probably on the slide for you though is, on the sides are the 16 different sectors that the Space Foundation considers to be part of the space ecosystem. So you're definitely seeing space. But again, there's agriculture and energy and healthcare and pharmaceuticals and the Internet of Things and transportation. So whether you knew it or not, you're already part of the space ecosystem. The question is, where do you want to go from today to build your foundation for the future? I'm just going to cover 2 quick programs we offer so you can kind of understand how that workforce development roadmap works. We do have an entrepreneur and leadership program. And this was initially started with the Minority Business Development Agency to create more access and opportunity to underrepresented groups and create a pathway so individuals could come into the space ecosystem. Remember, breaking down that barrier, extending a hand to create that access point. We did also create it so that anyone can take our programs online virtually with free webinars. We also did in-person workshops. This was pre-COVID, but now we're coming out of COVID with in-person workshops as well as virtual workshops. And you can see how we did that workforce development roadmap, partnering with the Minority Business Development Agency, partnering with universities, creating training programs with videos and workshops, connecting. Some of those individuals received scholarships to our space symposium. so they could connect into the space ecosystem. And several of them came out with letters of intent for their business, and then helping them have mentors and coaches throughout this journey. We take this entrepreneurial theme into the high school as well, because we need to create more innovative and entrepreneurial future leaders. And so this is our junior space entrepreneurship program, and it's two-phase. One, kids are part of a team. And the team is, you could say it's like a SpaceX or a NASA team. They're doing all the math and science to go to Mars and safely return. But then all the kids get a new hat, because once they've returned from Mars, they now have to think, what is one item they learned on their journey that they could commercialize? And now they're a company, and now they all wear different hats. One is the finance officer, one is the technology officer, one is the marketing officer. So they learn about going to Mars with the math and the science and the excitement, and then they learn what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And again, we did this through our 5-step workforce development roadmap. I wanted to share again some of those networking and mentoring opportunities that are out there, both for you to find a mentor, but also be a mentor and join like-minded individuals that want to be part of the space ecosystem. I also highlighted our Symposium 365 that goes on 365 days a year, so we hope you'll join us, as well as continue to follow Foundation for the Future. And this is how you can reach me. I did put my LinkedIn in the chat, and you can follow me there as well. And so what I'm going to do, Lee, is now that we've done just a little bit of the overview, and I hope individuals have a much better understanding of the Space Foundation, our partnership with Foundation for the Future, and how we operate. And I know there are some questions coming into the chat. I'm happy to stay and answer questions and be respectful of time as well.
Okay, great. I do have a couple of questions. I love how Space Foundation takes the whole mantra of think globally, act locally, and just balls it up and throws it in the garbage, because we think globally and act globally and even beyond, right? So, not just awareness. You've done amazing work, especially I think during the pandemic, to build awareness through all the speaking that you're doing, both here and at all kinds of events around the world. But those specifics about the programs are really exciting. I think we've received at Space Foundation a couple of grant awards in the last few days even. And why don't you tell us a little bit about those programs?
Sure. So one of the things we do is with our programs, again, who are we partnering with? What are the objectives? So we did recently, and it's not public yet, is we have received a grant, and I'm not going to name the agency yet because it's not formally announced, to do our junior space entrepreneurship program with partner schools in the local Colorado Springs area. So we can go out into the schools and start to build those pathways with high school students. So that's one. Our JSEP program received a grant. We've also received a grant for our museum. We have our Space Foundation Discovery Center located in Colorado Springs, and that's where it's open to the public, but we also are open to school groups, especially disadvantaged communities that maybe can't attend Space Foundation Discovery Center, or they don't have the bus stipend to bus students to our facility. So we have a museum grant, and the program we're going to offer is called Small Steps, Giant Leaps, where we can start working with kids to learn about the space ecosystem, so eventually they become the future leaders. And a third grant we've received is for our space commerce entrepreneur and leadership program to do a program in Paraguay. So we have 3 grants, and then we're also partnering on another grant coming up for our space commerce program. And again, I kind of balled it all together. It's under our heading, and Leah's laughing. So I like to say we have the house, right? The development, and then, Center for Innovation and Education is like the HOA. And then it has 3 main subdivisions, right? Those big subdivisions. So one is our Space Foundation Discovery Center. The next one is education, and that's really K through 12 and teaching teachers. And then the third subdivision is our Space Foundation University. And those are more adult facilitation. You get a certificate, you go through our program. We have informal courses where you learn about space commerce. We do boot camps for entrepreneurship and innovation. We include leadership training as well, being a space leader and entrepreneur. and there's mentoring and coaching along the way. And all of these programs can both be delivered here in Colorado Springs. So we are open. Before COVID, we were open to have individuals come through our programs here. We put a stop. We're now reevaluating. Can we reopen that pipeline for individuals to come to Colorado Springs and go through our programs, hopefully starting next summer again. We also do them virtually, and then we will do them in person. So like the one in Paraguay. So I share with you, Lee, that, Center for Innovation and Education, that housing development with its 3 subdivisions is very robust. And again, we're looking at the current workforce, those adults that are wanting to reskill and upskill, as well as creating the future workforce, K through 12, and teaching teachers. And I don't want to say teaching teachers, I'm going to say sharing with teachers the importance that space is not about history, and it's not about memorizing the planets. It's about creating career path and job opportunities for all citizens, for all kids. Kids who have a high school diploma can go into fantastic opportunities in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, which is lab coats and 3D printing, all the way to rocket scientists. And so there are intern programs for kids in high school that can come right out of high school and go right into a job in manufacturing with an outstanding benefits, help their families. And there are intern programs like that all throughout the United States. There are other countries looking to create it, as well as, Arizona State University and Greg's wonderful program. So the Space Foundation really wants to help individuals find the right career path. And that's part of what we do with our teacher professional development, is many times teachers are the individuals who help students find career pathways. And so we have to help them understand that the space ecosystem has so many wonderful career pathways.
That's great. And I love how you highlighted technology transfer as well in your program, and wonder if, just to close us out, you could give one quick example of an entrepreneur who has benefited from the Tech Transfer Office and from Space Foundation's efforts as well.
Great question. So I'm going to give you a couple. One, there's a fabulous former NFL player who used the NASA Technology Transfer Office, took a healthcare application and commercialized it and brought it to market. And again, NASA helped him. He was able to get grants and funding. So you, as an entrepreneur, you can go to the NASA Technology Transfer Office. There are NASA people who can help you. There are grants you can apply for. The Space Foundation has individuals that can also, help you. The Space Foundation, I have to pay those consultants a fee, but you do have Small Business Administration, P-Tax, your Manufacturers Extension Partnership Program. There's one in every state to include Puerto Rico. So there are organizations in addition to Space Foundation that can help you. When we look at who has successfully gone through the Space Foundation Entrepreneurship Program, when we initially launched it, we had 275 plus small and medium-sized minority-owned businesses go through it. And some of them were very successful. They came to symposium and walked out with several letters of intent, both with the government as well as commercial viability. And we do have a space commerce entrepreneurship program going on at symposium this year that a company has sponsored to create more diversity in their supply chain. So they specifically said, Space Foundation, we want you to help us create a special track. We want you to help us find these underrepresented minority businesses. And then we want to bring them to symposium. We want you to create a special program for them. And we want them to meet our company representatives to see how they can do business with us. Now, of course, those companies will also be free to walk the exhibit hall and meet with all the other space companies and potentially grow their business. And that's what it's all about. Can we help those companies take it to the next step? So we have a lot of excitement. And again, we just received that grant to do a program in Paraguay with some great entrepreneurs as well. So a little bit there, Lee, about our past, our current, and our future plans for our space entrepreneurship efforts.
Thank you so much, Shelley. It's been a delight, as always, to have you on. It's such a privilege to work with you. And just for some of those resources, spacefoundation.org has a menu that includes the Center for Innovation and Education, and you can click on entrepreneurs there and find lots of information, free webinars that help guide entrepreneurs on how to build their businesses. So thank you so much, Shelley.
And if we could, I don't know if everybody is ready, but I would really be grateful if you would all take your beautiful pictures down, because this is the selfie of the future right now. And I would like to do a couple selfies, and I'm going to
That
have to
would
do
be-
2 groups because there's 2 pages. This is how I like to do all my events. And then you're going to, so if you really don't want me to post you on Facebook or something, then don't take your picture down. But if you take your picture down, I would love to be able to post about what a wonderful event today was and the great job that Tim and Lee and the Foundation for the Future are doing. And Mike, I see you too. It's good to see you. So, all right, I'm going to do page 1 right now. So 1, 2, 3. And you probably don't even know who's on page 1 or page 2. And now I'm going to page 2. 1, 2, 3. All right. Well, thank you, Lee, for indulging me. I hope you all have an exciting time. And Muriel's here to now talk about the Space Foundation, our research and analysis team, and our great product called the Space Report. So thank you so much for hosting us and inviting Space Foundation to join
Hi,
you.
Shelley. Thanks
Thank you.
for joining us. And Muriel, good to see you.
And thank you, Michael. We're grateful for all you do. And we continue to look forward to collaborate and continue to create more access and opportunity for all in the new global space ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. All right. The always inspirational Shelley. Mariel, I'm sorry that we're running just a little bit late. Thank you for your patience. Mariel Borowitz is an associate professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech. Her research deals with international space policy issues, including international cooperation in Earth observing satellites and space security challenges. She contributes to the Space Foundation's annual report, the Space Report, also a product of Space Foundation, and analyzing global workforce trends. Mariel, thank you for joining us today.
Great, thank you so much for having me. And I will share my screen here. Let's see. Let's try to find the right presentation. Let's do desktop and see if that'll work for me. Okay, are you able to see the presentation now?
We can see that. It's a little bit small if you can.
Yeah, let me put it in presentation mode.
There you go. We can
Perfect.
see it.
Always so nice when technology works. So thank you to Lee and to Conversations in the Future for having me here. I'm very happy to speak to this group. And as Shelley mentioned, I am going to talk about some material that's in the Space Report. So the Space Report has been around for more than a decade, and the document, the report basically looks at the global space industry and tries to look especially at different trends. And so there are sections on the economy, looking at government spending, looking at commercial revenue. So I also work on writing the commercial revenue section. There's a section on infrastructure and what's happening in terms of the development of new space infrastructure. And there's a section on the global space workforce. And that's a section that I have worked on for over a decade. So I originally was a researcher in the research and analysis group at the Space Foundation before I left and got my PhD and became a professor. But even in my new role, I can't get enough of this. And so I have continued on as a kind of independent consultant working with the Space Foundation and particularly writing this workforce section for them for many years. And so you can see here kind of just the cover page over the years. I actually had to leave some out. There's so many of them just of this workforce section. And so what I want to talk about in my talk today is some of the trends that we're seeing and especially focusing on this previous year. I'll talk about the United States space workforce in a little bit more detail and give you some of the metrics and things that we're tracking there, some of the trends that we're seeing, and then I'll talk about the space workforce in other parts of the world. Feel free to stop me if you have questions along the way, and otherwise I believe I will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so I first wanted to address, why is it interesting to look at the space workforce in this sort of quantitative way that I'm going to talk about today? Why do we want to look at these trends? So first, as I'm sure has been conveyed many times already in this session, the space workforce is incredibly important to the sector, right? It's the core of everything we do, everything that's possible in the industry, the advancements we're able to make. That's all because we have this workforce, right? And particularly a workforce that has very specialized skills or advanced education that is enabling us to do this cutting edge work, to do something that is very unique for our industry. Also, it's important to look at these trends because a healthy workforce contributes to broader economic benefits. So, when you have a group of space workers, say the clusters of space companies we have out in LA, for example, that has huge ramifications for that entire area. So even people that are not working directly for those companies really see the benefits of that in terms of the high-tech workforce, in terms of their engagement in the community, the economic impact for that region. And so understanding how large is this workforce? Where is this workforce? What kind of skills they have? What kind of companies are out there is really important for even people who aren't otherwise interested in space. And then also understanding the trends that are happening in the space workforce can give us insight into other industry trends. So just like we watch the economy, right? The space economy and what's happening with government funding, what's happening with commercial revenue from space, and we want to know what those trends are so we can see what's coming. Workforce does plays that same role, right? So we want to know if the workforce is going up, going down, staying steady, where those changes are taking place, how it compares to other countries. And so that's the type of information that I'm going to present to you here. And once again, these are almost every chart I'm going to show you is from the most recent release of the space report. And so I highly recommend, if you're interested in this type of material, go out and take a look at that, pick up a copy. Obviously I'm a bit biased, but I think it's a really great publication that the Space Foundation puts out each year. Okay, so as I mentioned, I want to start with what's happening in the United States. And I put up this chart because it gives you, at the bottom, you can see here what's happening overall with the totals. And so we are relatively constant, going down a little bit over kind of the 10-year period, but over the last 5 years, going up quite a bit. And so if you were to zoom out, what you would see is a little bit of decrease in the space industry, particularly after the dot-com boom, kind of in the early 2000s. But that kind of leveled out probably around 2006 and now has been really increasing since then. And so you see that growth pretty significantly over the 5-year. And as Shelley mentioned, just thinking about this past year, even with COVID and a global pandemic and all of the challenges that come with that, which I'll speak to in a minute, we still saw growth in the United States in terms of the space industry. Another point I want to make, and the reason I use this chart, even though I know it's hard to read in this format, is to talk a little bit about how we measure the space sector in the United States. And so the best source of data that we have at this moment is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that's where this data comes from. So the US Bureau of Labor Statistics collects information from every single employer in the United States on a regular basis. They have a very consistent method for doing that. And so it's great in terms of a reliable, consistent source that we can use year after year. But as you may be noticing from these categories on the side, it isn't a perfect one-for-one match with the space community, right? So we're getting broadcast and wireless communications equipment and manufacturing, guided missile and space vehicle manufacturing, for example. So they're not just space companies. We're catching a little bit of other stuff as well, although we do think that these categories are primarily space. We know there are space workers that we are not including in this analysis, right? So for example, there's a category that has to do with physical research, right? So physics and mathematics and engineering and some of these workers. And it's a huge number of workers that fit within that category because it's very broad. And so we know there are space workers captured in there. But if we were to include the whole category, it's not very accurate in terms of representing space because there's too much other stuff in there. So this is one of the challenges that we do have in terms of tracking what's happening in space. I think we have a pretty good number here and a pretty good sense of what the trends are. But that is one, I think, kind of interesting and useful gap to be aware of. That'd be great if we really had very space specific numbers in the United States. Okay, so I mentioned that in this last year, we wanted to look at what happened in the pandemic in particular. And you saw overall, if you look at all the space, those space codes together, we see growth. And here you can see that as well. So in particular, these three, which are sort of the space manufacturing related employment areas, they all saw growth even in the second half of the year. So after the pandemic had started in March, compared to, if you just look at overall US employment, clearly we had that huge drop because of the pandemic that's kind of slowly was coming back in the couple months after that. There are a couple of areas where we did see slight drops. So in satellite telecommunications, for example, but relatively small, especially compared to what we saw for the rest of the economy. Part of the reason for that is that space entities were able to continue work either remotely, so even kind of operating satellites and things that always had been done in person, a lot of entities found ways to allow that work to be done remotely. Where they did have to do work in person, so manufacturing of satellites, for example, they were actually relatively well suited to do that within with coronavirus limitations in place. So if you're working in a giant clean room, for example, you are already going to be wearing a mask, being pretty distant from other people, being in a large, well-ventilated space. So that allowed some of that work to continue going on. Some of the companies that were more hard hit are kind of the small suppliers, some of the entrepreneurial companies. So maybe people have heard about OneWeb went into bankruptcy and blamed that at least partially on the effects of the pandemic. Bigelow Aerospace as well laid off I think all of their workforce at the beginning of the pandemic, partly because of these impacts. And so, there were some effects. Now, the US government did step in to try to help with this. So they, for example, provided funding to a number of small launch companies. They also tried to support some of those small suppliers that are really critical in the space supply chain, but when things slow down, they don't have as much runway to keep going. So the US government was pretty proactive in addressing those issues. One of the things we see within the US space community, and particularly on the commercial or private side, is that there still is a lot of demand for these space employees. So we see pretty high salaries. You can see almost all of those sectors are above $100,000 a year in terms of their average salary. And almost all of them are seeing salaries continue to increase over the last 5-year period. And so typically when you see increasing salaries, it means, there's a high demand. They're trying to attract more workers. And that kind of goes along with Shelley mentioned that we're seeing companies are not always able to find all the people they want. This is another metric that makes that visible for us. One of the things that we're really interested in the space workforce are the demographics. What's happening in terms of equity and diversity in our sector. This is something, again, that's pretty hard to measure. So the United States government collects some data on this from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but they do it at an even higher level than the workforce data, the employment data that I just showed you. So for example, while I can track employment for satellite telecommunications, I can only look at demographic data and diversity data at the telecommunications level. So that includes satellite telecommunications, but includes all of the other types of telecommunications as well. But still, I think it's useful to look at that area. So for example, within that sector, 36% of the workforce is female. 18% of the workforce is made up by Black individuals. Although it's important to note when you look at where those individuals are employed, it's a smaller proportion among the category that's called professionals within this data collection. And among executives and senior level managers, it's only 2.8%. So certainly a lot more work that can be done. Aviation Week also collects some data on this for the aerospace and defense sector. So again, it includes space, but it's broader than space. In that sector, they see only about 24.3% female, and a little under 6% are Black individuals. Most space companies do not release this data publicly for their own company. So almost every company has some statement about the importance of diversity and you know, the importance of looking at these trends, but they don't necessarily kind of tell you exactly what's happening within their company. Northrop Grumman, I think, is an interesting and important exception to that. They do put out all of their data publicly, so everything that they release to Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they have up and available on their website, which I think is spectacular and so important for understanding what's happening in the sector. So they are pretty close and maybe slightly better than what we're seeing in overall aerospace and defense. So about 25% female, but close to 8% of their employees are Black, and at least higher than in telecommunications, 6.8% among executives and senior level managers. And then at the bottom, even though we've been talking about commercial sector up until now, I will put NASA as we're going to transition to there. NASA has about 34% of its population, of its employees that are female, and about 11% that are Black individuals. So that kind of transitions me over to talking about NASA. NASA is wonderful about providing workforce information. They have all sorts of data readily available online, which is it's great to work with. So you can see the kind of the trends overall in the NASA civil servant workforce. It's gone down fairly significantly in the first kind of half of this decade, but now is kind of slowly increasing. So there's a big emphasis the last number of years on trying to either decrease the size of the federal government or at least keep it level. And so that's something NASA has been dealing with. How do they keep the expertise they need without having a lot of ability to hire new people? And so you can kind of see that in the broad trends on the left. And then on the right, you can see this is kind of showing the age profile of that NASA workforce. And so each of these colors of a line is a particular time. So if you look at back in 1996, you really had a pretty well distributed workforce where, you know, the majority, the largest part under here is kind of in this middle 30 to 50 kind of age range. But over the years, that has been shifting more and more to the right, meaning that NASA's workforce as a whole is getting older and older. And so you can see this, the most recent one in 2021 is this green one with a peak of workers in that kind of 55 to 59-year-old range. There's, I think, about 10% of NASA's workforce that's eligible to retire. If they chose, could leave tomorrow. So that's certainly something that NASA is taking a look at and making sure that they have a clear transition to keep that knowledge as people leave. And then lastly, for the US, we also try to look at the national security workforce. Space Force is a tricky one since they're very much in transition right now. But they started 2020 with about 2,400 military individuals working there and about 6,000 civilians. And they're going to ramp that up eventually to have about 16,000 Guardians in the Space Force. Pretty much all of those people came from the Space Force. And so Space Force now, as of 2021, no longer has any what they call organic space specialties, people who are very, entirely focused on space. They've all been moved to the Space Force, but they do have some things that overlap. So cybersecurity, geospatial intelligence, people working in these areas sometimes deal with space. And so you'll have some of them in the Air Force, some in the Space Force. And you can see the other numbers here, 28 people in the military, in the Army that work at the Army Space and Missile Center, about 409 who are active duty space operations, so very specifically working on space. Again, a little over 400 in the Navy that are considered part of their core space cadre. And then there's also a number of people in the intelligence community that are working on space issues. So close to 10,000 in combination between the National Reconnaissance Office, does our spy satellites, and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency that's analyzing that data and turning it into intelligence. And I realize when I'm in presentation mode, I can't see my clock. So Lee, feel free to jump in if I'm getting close to the end of my time. The last few slides here I have are on global.
About 5 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
I think I'm just on time then. The last few slides I have here are on global space employment. Now, I mentioned to you the challenges of studying what's happening in the US space employment, right? That we have some very good, very consistent measures, but not perfectly measuring space. And we have similar problems in looking at other countries as well. Europe, Japan, and India all have some pretty reliable, consistent data. And the reason we don't include data from other countries, Russia and China, being some of the ones that, of course, we'd love to know what the trends are there in terms of their space workforce. It's really because of the lack of data availability. So you might see a number pop up here or there every once in a while, comes up in a speech or something like that. But there's really no consistent way to see how they're measuring it and how it's changing over time. So we look at these entities as a taste of what's happening globally. Excuse me. So this is showing the European space industry employment. As you can tell, they're really steadily increasing over time. Europe continues to invest in space. And we see that with the European Union kind of engaging in this area and trying to build up their programs with Copernicus, with their Earth observation system. So a lot going on there, and you see that in the workforce as well. In Japan, similar trends. So they're relatively stable over time, but a little bit of growth at least there, especially on the private side, on the industry side. JAXA really has been impressively steady, I would say, over this time, within about 10 employees, one way or the other. And you can see here kind of the distribution of that workforce within Japan as well on the commercial side. Really increasing the number of people they have in terms of space vehicles and building ground facilities. And then on the software side, seeing a little bit more change over time. So some decreases on the 5-year span, but potentially going back up again. And then in India, so it's important to note here, we're looking at, instead of commercial workforce, this is the government workforce. But in India, almost all space activity is done in-house by the government. There's some indications that might be starting to change. Maybe they're getting some kind of entrepreneurial commercial activity separate from the government. But for now, this is pretty representative of the space community as a whole for them. And you can see here kind of ups and downs as well, but coming up again in the recent years. We are able to do a little bit of demographic comparisons across these different areas that we look at. And you can see here, and now we're focusing on the space agencies. So there isn't demographic data available for the most part when you're looking at the industry as a whole, the private industry in these other regions of the world. But we can look at their space agencies. That information is available. And so you can see in terms of gender breakdown, relatively similar, between 20 and 34%. NASA is actually doing pretty well compared to others in that area. And then also the age breakdown. So ESA is kind of the European Space Agency is the outlier there. And it's, I think this is a policy decision about how they do hiring, that they don't tend to hire people until they already have some experience in the industry. And so that's why you see such a small number of young professionals within the European Space Agency. And I won't talk about this one in detail, but just to mention that we do try to go out and see, well, what are some of the other countries? Is there anybody else who's posting about how many people they're employing, at least in their space agency, in a given year? And so we try to report on that as well. And I think it's an interesting, just kind of a sense of what's out there, who has space employees, about how many people are coming in and working on these issues from the government side. But you do have to take it with a grain of salt in the sense that, like India, like I mentioned, does almost everything in-house, whereas Russia, who's not on the list this year, but sometimes is included, their government agency, Roscosmos, tends to be just those who are overseeing the activity. And almost everything is done outside Roscosmos in national industries and commercial entities. So the meaning of these numbers varies. And with that, I think I'm finished with the prepared slides and happy to take questions if there are any.
Great. I actually am curious about, you mentioned several things that aren't measured, right? Or that you can't rely on. What is possibly the single most frustrating piece of data that you can't get your hands on in your work?
Yeah. Oh, so many to choose from. So I would like, I mean, I wish we had a better measure of the US space industry. I think it's such an important and growing piece of the US economy, and there's so much interest in it. And yet, at least on an official level, we don't collect data on, you know, a fine grain enough scale that we can really tell what's happening with the space industry, separate from defense, separate from aerospace, you know, or aviation. And so I'd really love to see that happen. And then I think the follow-up to that would be other major spacefaring countries. So like I mentioned, Russia and China, I would love if they would put out, you know, even if not something every year, at least maybe a major report about what's happening with their workforce. There's a little bit of a black box there, and I think it'd be really interesting to understand what they're doing as well.
That's great. Yeah, we had a speaker from the Department of Commerce. She was an economist back in January or February, maybe, whose name is Tina Highfill. So you might chat with her about your dreams. She said that they take feedback on how they're designing their measurements, and it might be a good opportunity for you to put your 2 cents in and push some evolution there in their
Yeah,
work.
absolutely.
Great. And you did get some comments during your talk. Terry Trevino, we have a segment called What's Going On? And Terry Trevino says, hey, Russia, hey, China, what's going on? And Darsh says, NASA is doing much better, even though we need all agencies to be at 50 or more % when it comes to female workforce.
Yeah, and I would, you know, so I want to say too, when I present, especially the information on demographics, and I kind of made this point with putting Northrop Grumman out there, there's a lot of work to do, but I really want to give credit to the agencies and to the companies that are putting their information out, because I think it's hard to make progress and to know if we're making progress without having those numbers. And so I really wish more companies and even more agencies would put that information out there and you know, show what they're doing.
Right, because as Dave Huntsman is pointing out, you can't just magically hire a woman for a job that maybe there aren't as many women in the talent pool to hire, right? They didn't get that degree, right? And so getting the data within the companies means that you learn where you need to provide opportunity farther forward in the workforce pipeline that Shelley talked about, right? You need to, oh, is it elementary school? Is it 8th grade where we're losing all the girls? What do we need to do? And you know, are we seeing gaps as a result of not having a balance of women and men in that job?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at, you know, a piece that we used to do many years ago is looking at the educational pipeline as well. And what, you know, what is the breakdown, or what are the numbers and the trends in the different majors that are most relevant to the space industry? And so, yeah, it's a really interesting question.
So thank you also to Dave for bringing that up. Well, I think it's been wonderful having you on. I really appreciate you sharing some of those numbers and your work. Really appreciate the collaboration with Space Foundation on the space report. It's sort of critical infrastructure for the space industry, and really appreciate your dedication to that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here.
All right, our next speaker is Paul Jarrison. He is the director of Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub, leading the deployment of public sector focused innovation programs. Most recently, he was the director of enterprise systems at Cal Poly, and then he was IT chief at the United States Geological Survey's National Geospatial Technical Operations Center. Paul, it's great to have you back as a speaker. You've been a loyal attendee for many months, and it's always nice to see you and great to have you as a speaker.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think you're right. I think I've been at every one of these events from the start, so I kind of feel feel at home here. So,
Steadfast
so,
and true.
yeah, so again, thanks for having me, and I have a tough act to follow. That was some great data Muriel had, and Shelley had some great information there as well. One of the things that I'm going to talk about, which is going to be different, I think, than the last two speakers, is a little bit about how we try at Cal Poly at the Digital Transformation Hub, how we try to get our students experiential education, so they can look at what they really want to do in the future, and then apply that. So I've got some slides, but one thing you get when you get me is you get a couple of our students too, who are on the screen there. So Charles DeVilliers is one of our students who's doing some research on workforce development and working some with the Foundation for the Future. And Lily Turkstra is a project manager at the Digital Transformation Hub. There she is. And she gets the opportunity to work with me a lot, and is doing project management on a lot of our new projects we're working on. So in a little bit, I'll have Charles talk a little bit about the work he's doing as well. But I've got a few slides to go through, and let's see if I can share my screen in the right way. Let's see here.
There they are.
Do this. Does that look all right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So just a little bit of a background on what the Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub is, and you'll see on the screen there it says powered by AWS. AWS is Amazon Web Services, is our strategic partner at the Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub. And what that means for us is that we work pretty closely with AWS on innovation methodologies, design thinking kinds of methodologies, their tools to do our project. So they've been a great partner for us, and they allow us to do some things that we wouldn't be able to do without a private partner. So we do a lot of that. I'll just do a quick background on Cal Poly in case people don't know about us. So Cal Poly is in San Luis Obispo, California. Our motto is learn by doing. As you can see, ready day one. This looks like a marketing slide, and it kind of is. But some of the information about Cal Poly is we really focus on hands-on learning, experiential research, real-world experiences. All of our students have that opportunity to get real hands-on experience in lots of different areas. The university's got about 21,000 students. Physically, we're big. We have 9,000 acres. I think it's the second largest by land mass in California. And that makes sense because we're a big agricultural school as well. So we have a lot of agricultural activity going on around campus. Let's see, U.S. News and World Report has ranked us as the best master's level university in the West for 28 straight years. What that means is we don't do PhD programs. So we go up through the master's level, but not PhD. Okay. We have 6 colleges. You can see those on the screen. They're kind of what you might expect. And our engineering school is probably the most well-known. We have a big aeronautical engineering program, I believe the largest in California. And lots of the students from our engineering programs go to work in the space industry with, SpaceX and Vandenberg Air Force Base and all of the big space companies. In fact, Tori Bruno, the CEO of United Launch Alliance, is a Cal Poly alumni. But what I want to talk about today, which is going to be a little different than this, is that we have lots of students that come from other parts of the university who are great options for the space industry as well. It's not only the engineering and astronautics folks as well. So I'm going to talk some more about that. The picture you see on the screen, however, is our CubeSat lab. So we have a lab on campus that develops and builds satellites and launches them. So that is actually a CubeSat that we've developed on the screen there. One of our professors with the cowboy hat is the guy that leads that organization. So taking the next step, the Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub and our sister organization, which is the California Cybersecurity Institute, we both fall under the same organization at Cal Poly, work a lot with getting experiential education out to our constituents. And our constituents are our students, our faculty, high school students, and other folks who are looking at either upskilling or reskilling their skills. So the Digital Transformation Hub is focused primarily on coming up with innovative solutions to public sector problems and challenges. So we work with nonprofits, government, and education primarily. Every once in a while, we have a commercial company in there as well. But the interesting thing is that we have 7 or 8 full-time people on our staff, and they're solutions architects and technology folks and public policy folks. But then we have lots of students that work on these problems and challenges with us. And those students, when they work on these challenges, are gaining real world experience, working with real customers, using the latest innovation methods and emerging technologies to help solve many problems out there. Just a few examples. We work with World Bank is one of our largest customers. We do a lot of different work all around the world on that. We have Vandenberg Air Force Base is another big customer of ours, and we work with trying to shorten the time between launches there. We've got a prototype we've been working on there for a while. And we cover a large range of projects. Gender equity in Kenya is an issue we've worked on. So what we're finding is that we have students from, you saw that list of those 6 colleges. We have students from all of those 6 colleges working on the challenges we work on. So some of them are looking at software development, some are working on project management like Lily, some are working on doing policy analysis, some are doing research, but what they get to do is work on lots of different projects in different ways. And what that does is really gives the students a view of what it might be like to work in different industries. One of the things we find working with government industries or government organizations like Vandenberg Space Force Base, I should have said, by the way, they just changed their name. The Vandenberg Space Force Base, or working with city governments, is that we find that students don't think about going to work for a government agency when they're in school. They want to go work for Google, or they want to go work for AWS or somebody like that, until they go and actually look at what some of these government organizations are doing, the NASAs of the world, and they say, wow, look at the really cool things that these organizations are doing. They're launching rockets, they're doing meteorological analysis on launch ranges, they're doing all kinds of really cool things that people don't really think about or know about. So that's what we try to really get the experience into the students' hands, and looking at what it really takes to work in these organizations. So what we try to do then is to instill a variety of things with our students, but and with our customers, right? So on the left side of the screen there, you'll see in that green box 3 things: innovation, digital transformation, and digital literacy. When we put the Digital Transformation Hub together, the thing we said was, let's go into these public sector organizations who don't tend to be all that innovative, and really talk to them about how they can become more innovative, how they can look at digital transformation across their organizations, and how they can instill digital literacy into their employees so they can move forward into basically the art of the possible, to understand what's possible out there. That didn't work. We walked into these organizations and said those 3 things, and they looked at us like a deer in the headlights. So we had to kind of regroup. We came back out and we said, okay, here's what we really want the organizations to think about. We want them to be able to think differently about their problems, think about who their customers are, who they're solving a problem for, what the benefit is if they can solve this problem, and what is that solution going to look like. We also want them to look at what is possible. What is the art of the possible? If you're using artificial intelligence, or you're using computer vision, what can you do that you didn't know you could do before, right? So a lot of people, and we saw that chart Muriel had, a lot of people have been working in the industry that they've been in for a long time, and they haven't necessarily followed the new emerging technologies and what those things can do. Becoming more digitally literate and understanding what those technologies can do can allow them to think about what might be possible. They don't all have to be AI specialists, but if they have that digital literacy behind them, they can imagine what could happen in the future and how they can make their jobs more efficient. All that comes down to changing the culture in organizations. And again, what we're trying to do here is really look at how we can change, how we can develop the next workforce, the space workforce, but also get people to think differently about how to do their jobs. So when we think about space workforce training, we want to think about who we're trying to train, right? So existing workers in lots of different industries can transition to the space workforce relatively easily because there's similar positions in the space workforce as there is in the traditional workforce. We want to look at K through 12 students and get them interested and excited in working in the space workforce and understanding what's going to happen there and what could be done there before they get too far into their educational career, so that they might look into what it takes to work in the space workforce in the future. And then college students, people who are in college, and the engineering folks, the aerospace engineering folks kind of already know what's available in the space workforce. But people who are working in areas like psychology and landscape architecture and architectural engineering and communications, there's room for all of those folks in the space industry as well. And what we want to be able to do is instill that knowledge so they know what's available and how they might be able to get into that industry if that's what they want to do. So what are we training the space workforce for? What areas? I think it's almost anything. If we look into the future, if we start looking at lunar structures, if we start looking at Martian structures, if we start looking at living in space, this covers almost everything, right? Engineers, farmers, carpenters, welders, manufacturing folks. We need all of them in the space industry, and we want to make sure people know that they can do that and look at how we can do that. So how are we going to do that? I think getting the core knowledge of what the space industry actually is and what the possibilities are is very important. I talked about digital literacy and getting folks to understand the digital parts of what happens in society today and understanding what the art of the possible is there. We're a cloud innovation center, and one of the things that you can do as a cloud innovation center is become a certified cloud practitioner, which gives you kind of a core basis for what cloud technology can do for you and how it can benefit the work you're doing. One of the things I think about is, what if we had a space practitioner program that gave people, students, K through 12 folks, existing workers, a good baseline on what the components of the space industry are. What do we need to know? What about low gravity? What about radiation? What about the core things that appear in the space industry? So I think that's important to look at as well. And you'll see on the bottom of the screen here, experiential learning, flexibility, adaptability, agility, and learn by doing are all really important things to keep in mind at almost all times, because those things are going to be necessary as we move forward and the space economy grows. There's jobs that are going to be out there that we don't even know about today. So we need to have those characteristics to be able to adjust to much of this as well. Charles, could I get you to say a few words about the work you've been doing so far? Maybe.
So we'll have to make him a co-host so he can unmute himself. Sorry about that.
Oh,
No worries. There we go.
There we go. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Shelley had said earlier that everyone can be part of the space industry, and I'm a student of landscape architecture, and this was the last place that I expected to be working this summer, but happened to see a job listing, and it has been such a fun experience, and really it's only just recently begun. So I'm having a blast learning about all of this, the space endeavors that we're all involved with. And it was kind of actually interesting. I just came back from South Africa to celebrate my grandma's 100th birthday, and my niece just turned 1 who was there. And my grandma, she was born just a few years after the first commercial airplane flight. And now my niece, she turned 1 just a few weeks after the first commercial space flight. So it was kind of interesting seeing those 2 generations so close to each other. Just quite a difference 100 years has made. But yeah, I've been working with Foundations for the Future and the DX Hub at Cal Poly, working primarily with looking at the workforce that's going to be needed and just compiling that information. And these conversations have been enormously helpful actually in that. And so the first few weeks, really, I was just kind of researching and podcasts and YouTube videos and anything that was relevant. And yeah, I guess as a landscape architect, I'm kind of, we actually had somebody who did their senior project at the end of this last year on a Mars colony. And definitely as a profession, it may seem like it is quite far removed from space, but it's actually quite interesting to see just some of the practical applications that people in the program have, like with this Mars colony, been able to have. Yeah, just also I think as a profession, it's kind of at the intersection of a lot of other professions with dealing with engineering and culture and urban planning and a lot of research and adaptability and such like that, that I think is kind of a natural flow into this space workforce. So yeah, it's been so fun to look at things, especially looking at like the arts and things that aren't traditionally thought of. Things like we've looked at with sports entertainment. The last conversation, we were looking at things like horticulture and culinary expertise and even brewing, and there's been some really interesting research that I've been looking at as well on just artwork and cultural centers and how when we look at the moon and the Mars, instead of just looking at it at this kind of destination, this place for conquest, looking at it at this opportunity to update norms and customs and laws and technologies. Yeah, I think the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 was looking at the free access to all areas of the celestial body and kind of this global work that we're all doing to explore and to kind of look at these resources that we all share. So yeah, it's been super fun to be part of the team, and I'm not sure if there was anything more specific you wanted me to talk about, Paul, but that might give you guys just a little bit of a insight in terms of what students in untraditional backgrounds as far as space goes, are actually doing as part of this whole.
Yeah. Thanks, Charles. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think it's always good to get the perspective of the students that we're actually working with, and I think we get some really good feedback from our students on, all of the insights they gain from working in different industries across, lots of different organizations around the world. So, on the screen there right now, you see just a listing basically of lots of different areas that can apply to the space industry. And there's way more than than those on the screen there as well. But what we try to do is to make sure that those areas that are not necessarily engineering oriented can be focused on as well as far to meet the needs of the space industry. One of the other things that we think is really important is to be able to get information to students who are still in K through 12, in middle school, high school, areas like that. So I wanted to show a couple of areas where I know things like this are happening today. We work with a group in Argentina called Open Space, and an Open Space really tries to get their students involved in the space industry early. And they do this through a challenge sort of process where they're developing CubeSats that are going to be launched into space. They work on lots of different things like ground stations and those sorts of things. And they really try to immerse their students in the space industry to get them interested in moving forward into the future. At Cal Poly, we have another program that's called the Space Grand Challenge, which is an international program it's actually a competition related to cybersecurity in space, where we'll do a competition between students from Argentina, this organization here called Open Space, Australia, and the United States. So we'll have roughly 8,000 or 10,000 students competing in a virtual reality sort of activity where they look at an incident where a satellite has been hacked and data has been compromised on that satellite. And what they need to do is understand how satellites work, how ground stations work, how telecommunications work, and how to do the forensics around cybersecurity to be able to uncover who hacked the satellite, what data they got from that hacking, and what they might do with it. And then they need to present their findings to a group of judges. So they also learn communications techniques and those sorts of things as well. So that's a really exciting thing that we're doing, and we think that will get students, younger students, involved in the industry as well. There's also and I talked a little bit about this before, but these are some of the projects that we work on at the Digital Transformation Hub, and we're working with Vandenberg Space Force Base on how to make their systems more efficient for commercial companies trying to launch there. Basically, creating a system or a prototype to be able to reduce the time to launch from something like 18 months to 3 months is what we think we can do there. So that's all in work today. We've created some cybersecurity encryption devices for small sats. That's actually going through an STTR project right now, which is also kind of exciting. The other thing that we have at Cal Poly is the CubeSat team. And the CubeSat team, as you saw that picture on that first slide, they basically have an internal Cal Poly company, which is a club, and they're basically a space company. They develop satellites for industry. They have marketing. So in this screen, this is the club. They have marketing folks, they have manufacturing people, they have engineering people, they have e-commerce people. It's basically a company within the university where students who think they might be interested in the space industry can join this club and truly participate in what it's like to be working in the space industry before they graduate. And this is great because not everybody wants to work in the space industry, but you get a feel for what it might be like to do that. And you can come from multiple disciplines to be able to do that as well. Just another example of what might be able to be done there. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about where some of the space workforce might come from. And these are folks who traditionally wouldn't think about working in the space industry, but due to some recent developments, like horizontal launch, these are a couple of headlines I pulled out of the news in the last couple of days. So Paso Robles, California is looking at developing a spaceport at the municipal airport. And Lily is actually leading a project on that. So that's an interesting development. There's a company called Agile Space Industries in Durango, Colorado, small town in southwest Colorado, that's bringing space-related jobs to Durango. We've been working with an organization called the Rural Innovation Network, they're a nonprofit who's looking at how to bring technology-based jobs to small cities around the country of under 50,000 people. So they have about 20 cities they work with today. And we're working with them from the Digital Transformation Hub as well to try to bring some technology to them.
Paul, if you'd like to give Lily just a moment to speak, though she'll have about 2 minutes.
All right. Lily, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and the work you've done so far at the Digital Transformation Hub?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm coming in as a fourth-year psychology major at Cal Poly, and I'm looking to going into human factors engineering and sort of human-centric design. And through the work at the DX Hub, I've really come to learn and see how influential that is in the space infrastructure and that workforce area. And especially through this conference today, I've come to learn so much about all of these different intersections and people and jobs where not just engineers and the typical aerospace centric people going into those fields can get into space and that sort of thing. So it's been very helpful and interesting to be involved in this. With the DX Hub specifically, I'm helping to work with the city of Paso Robles to develop a spaceport and go through their FAA spaceport application for their license. And so that's been a very interesting experience as well and helped me gain some experience and interest in that realm as well.
Thanks, Lee.
That's great. Really excited to see more from your group. Paul, we'll have to have you come back and give an update and bring more students. Thank you, Lily.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Paul.
Love to do that.
Our next speaker is Dr. Greg Autry. He is the recipient of the 2021 Space Advocate of the Year Award. He is launching the Thunderbird School of Management's Executive Master of Global Management in Space Leadership, Business, and Policy, which was our generous sponsor for our Saturday Space segment today. He previously taught technology entrepreneurship at the University of Southern California, strategy macroeconomics at the University of California at Irvine, and space entrepreneurship in an international space university program at the Florida Institute of Technology. Dr. Autry served on the 2016 NASA Agency Review Team and as the White House liaison at NASA. He was also nominated to serve as the Chief Financial Officer at NASA in 2020. Dr. Autry currently serves as chair of the Safety Working Group on the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee at the FAA and as vice president for space development at the National Space Society. He writes for and appears on major media and newspapers on a regular basis. Thank you so much for joining us today, Greg.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. And I want to give a shout out to my Cal Poly friends. I was a Cal Poly Pomona undergrad, great organization. I'm going to, if I could, share some slides to get started here.
I'll let you know when we can see them.
Is my share up?
Yes, we can see them, and they're fun.
Okay, fantastic. So I entitled this talk, Take Me to Your Leader, Fixing the Future Leadership Gap in Space. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to talk about that in the context of our national infrastructure needs and in just the boom that's going on in the space industry, which is an exciting time to live. I actually started studying the commercial space industry back in 2003 when I began adjunct teaching at University of California, Irvine. And at that time, I got the attitude from a lot of my peers in the business school that this wasn't really a thing, that space was a government domain, that it would stay that way. And there would be a continual conglomeration of large companies coming together until we ended up with two, and that would be the space business. And, you know, I remember saying, there's this Elon fellow, and you're going to hear about him someday. I'm happy to say that they have. And, you know, if you look at the market today, the Space Foundation tells us that we've got a $423 billion market. The folks at the business schools that I taught at for a long time did not understand what that meant. I tried to explain this to my good friends at the Marshall School at USC, where I taught for 7 years. And tried to get them to launch a specific space program. But, you know, they were all into blockchain and crypto, what have you, and whatever the latest Silicon Valley, you know, idea was. They invested a lot of time in nanotech and things like that. And I said, the space is already bigger than those things. Space is 5 or 6 times bigger than the mobile app industry if you look at the revenues actually generated from the apps. And that's just today. The projections, of course, you got Bank of America saying we're going to go to about $3 trillion. To put that in perspective, that is the size of the entire UK economy, or about twice the size of the Russian economy. So it's a serious thing. We need people to do this, okay? And there's a small percentage of people in our society who have realized seriously that they could work in the space industry. There's excitement about the space industry like there's never been before. And we have a whole generation raised on science fiction. I think if I did a poll and I asked, I think about 15% of the American public probably believes there are people living on other planets or in space stations. It would be interesting to see, but they're used to that idea of a bold future. And I'm excited that we can take them there. So what have we been missing? There's all these news stories, and they've been going on for a decade, right? About the aerospace engineering shortage, and companies are fighting over this, and Congress is going to do something about it, right? So what do we do about that? Well, the obvious thing has been that we need a bigger focus on STEM, and we've been pushing that in K through 12. And we've been working hard, in particular, to diversify our engineering workforce. And I'm excited to see that. I know the Viterbi School at USC, where I taught, made a commitment to make their admittance 50% female, for instance. And there's been a big sea change. When I was at USC, I taught almost entirely engineers in entrepreneurship. So I had an entrepreneurship course for technology commercialization, and they were almost all from the engineering school. And seeing the improvement in diversity coming in from that program just over 7 years was really fantastic. But what are we missing, right? So this focus has been all about STEM, and what we haven't had is space qualified leadership. There's been no official pipeline for managers and executives. And I've even watched people being drained out of NASA into the commercial space sector, which is paying really, really, really good salaries. I did a survey before I helped ASU launch a new program, and the amount of money being offered to these folks is, twice what they were making, even if they were, senior executive service folks making $189,000. All of a sudden, the commercial sector is offering them 2x that. But there's no dedicated business school solution, and there hasn't been. You're going to say to me, but wait, we already have great leaders, right? And yeah, this is a super industry to be in. And I love all the people you see on the screen, and some others I couldn't fit in there. But in some ways, each of these people are a bit unique. And in many cases, they had to take the school of hard knocks to get to where they are. There wasn't a clear path to becoming a space leader necessarily. Perhaps you became a software engineer writing video games, which is how I started my career when I was 18, or even before that. Well, that's one way to become a space executive. Another way is maybe to be an astronaut, right? But there's not a clear normal path to space executive. So what do we do about that? And let us realize that we've had great leaders in other industries in the past, and we need to think about that, because when I talk to people in the space world today about what's going on with commercial space, and they see the disruption that's being brought in by companies like SpaceX and what you see going down there in Brownsville, which is amazing. And then they look at some of the existing companies, and they're perhaps disdainful of the risk taking or innovation of the management there. And I say, let's think about that, right? Does anybody know who these people are? I've got 3 people on the screen here. Anybody want to type into the chat session and tell me who we're looking at? Tick, 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 crickets. All right. Hughes, okay, so thank you, Goncalo. It's great to hear from you. And Kevin, fantastic. The center person is indeed Howard Hughes, who in between making movies and flying giant airplanes and doing adventurous things, he founded airlines, and he founded a leading aerospace company that has been acquired and is now part of Boeing. Good guess on Glenn Curtis, but no, actually we're looking at Bill Boeing on the left, and we're looking at Alan Lockheed on the right. And the reason I put them up here is these were really disruptive, troublemaking individuals at their time who did wild and crazy things, right? And what happens is that individuals like this generally don't recruit other people who are the same sort of intuitive, natural leaders that they are. It's like there can be only one in an organization. And what happens then is when they're gone, their organizations are taken over by finance minions and JDs, lawyers, and these people are a lot less risk tolerant, and their job is to deliver value from the company these folks created with great risk taking and iterative development and innovation and crashing airplanes and stuff, and turn that into a continual and dependable cash flow that doesn't have any surprises. All right. We need for the commercial space sector coming up to kind of retain what we have in the disruption and keep that innovation going, for the day when, God forbid, we don't have a Richard Branson or an Elon Musk leading us. I hope they live forever, but the reality is we need to have that next generation there. And we need to help the existing traditional companies learn how to dance again. There's a great book by Lou Gerstner called Elephants Can Dance, where he talks about turning IBM into a more responsive organization when it faced disruption from Apple and Microsoft back in the 80s and 90s. And that can be done, but how do we do that? How do we bring the right talent in? So there are some new companies that are interesting. One that is near and dear to my heart was founded out of the Viterbi School at USC, and I had the real honor to follow Tim Ellis and Jordan Noon through their careers since they were students there in the Rocket Propulsion Lab, which has been a great incubator for startups. And Relativity Space is now worth $4.2 billion, and it was just astounding to watch that. But again, Tim is frankly a natural leader, another one of these Elon Musk, Peter Beck sort of characters that is going to figure it out through the School of Hard Knocks. That isn't everybody, that is a great engineer. And so a lot of folks who could take their brilliant ideas forward and turn them into companies, they really need this more formalized training. We can't count on all these unicorns being organically growing. There are other exciting companies. Eternal Light was a group that came out of my program with Andy Aldrin at Florida Tech and ISU that we teach every summer. Normally at Kennedy Space Center. We were online last year, but that team's actually going to land a payload on the moon. I'm really excited. And so I wanted to talk that there are some programs coming together to address this management problem, right? At Florida Tech ISU, Andy and I have been doing this program for 3 years now. We just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago, and I see that one of our guests online, Goncalo Estevez, is here, was one of our fantastic students. It's a really good way if you're interested in getting a commercial space context, and for somebody that already perhaps has a graduate degree, getting this additional certificate is a really good way to apply yourself. And the other thing is the networking is just incredible in this class. We went to OneWeb, we went out to Redwire Made in Space. We had Vice President of Boeing's Defense and Space Division, Mr. Chilton, come in as a guest speaker. I had Doug Lavaro and a number of other fantastic people, Jordan Noon from Relativity Space, talk to these classes, and it's just a great place to be. So that's one option. Andy and I helped Embry-Riddle Worldwide kind of put together an outline for a program, and he's going to go off and lead that program. And it's a Master of Space Operations, which will include some of this business sort of stuff that we're talking about. It's a fully online program. And knowing what a good job Andy does, I strongly recommend people consider that if they're looking for a full online program. Other schools that are doing this, I have been honored to work with Oxford University on a couple of different series that they've been doing, and there's going to be a whole series of about a dozen videos coming out where I get to interview Oxford academics who are brilliant geniuses in AI, robotics, and other areas, and connect them with people in the space industry and talk about what's going there. And I expect you'll see some educational opportunities come out of that direction. But what I'm most personally excited about is the program I'm getting to launch at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, which is now part of Arizona State University. For those of you that don't know, Thunderbird has been training global leaders since the late 1940s, when it was founded by a group of Army Air Corps officers who realized that after World War II, we were going to be in a new globalized business environment, and that we needed to have leaders that could handle that. So they specifically put together a school, which originally started at Thunderbird Airfield, which is a training field outside of Phoenix, and was run by Air Force officers to educate people in languages, cultures, and the business standards around the world, and help them make that connection. I am excited that the school continues to be visionary and has had the good sense to launch the first real master's program in business designed specifically for space leadership. So the program's called the Executive Global Masters in Space Leadership, Policy, and Business, and will launch this January. It will be a hybrid program in downtown Los Angeles with alternating online weekends. So you do one weekend in downtown LA at our brand new exciting building, the former Herald Examiner building in 11th and Broadway, and then you'll do one weekend online. So it's designed for the busy global executives. You'll need to come into LA once a month. We'll also have a 1 week stint at the Kennedy Space Center, which we're going to be doing in concert with what Andy Aldrin and I have been doing out there. And that'll be an exciting opportunity to get hands-on with the Space Coast ecosystem, as well as the California system. So we chose, interestingly, to be in LA, and Arizona State University has a real commitment to LA because that is the hub of so many great things, including the commercial space industry. Faculty, wow, I am just amazed. And this is one of the reasons that, although I had a number of offers made to me when I ended up on the job market earlier this year after the Senate failed to get its act together on my CFO nomination and hold a vote, I chose Arizona State University because of what I call the broader space enterprise there. The cross-disciplinary interest that has support from all the way at the top. Michael Crow, the president of ASU, loves what's happening in space now. And they're really interested in bringing together engineering, science, business, and policy and law in a coordinated effort to address this domain. So you've got myself, and I won't introduce myself again, but Lindy Elkin-Tanton, she is an amazing educator, first of all. But the thing that's most exciting right now is she's the PI on the Psyche program, which will launch on a Falcon Heavy this August. So she's really busy putting together one of the most exciting NASA exploration programs in a long time. We're going to go look at a real metal asteroid, one of those things that companies want to mine and turn into the first trillionaire creators. Zahir Ali works for USRA up at NASA Ames and has helped lead a number of NASA efforts there for them, including the SOFIA telescope, which flies on a 747. Jim Bell works at Caltech as the PI on the mass cams on the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover. So when you see those great photos from Mars, Jim did that. He's going to be one of the instructors in your class if you join us. He's also formerly the president of the Planetary Society, the nonprofit organization that I probably admire most in the space area for executing everything professionally and well. Tambi Aganaba, who goes by Timmy, is an incredibly well-respected international expert on space law and space policy. And she brings a really, I think, amazing perception of how did we take these economic opportunities, these physical opportunities, and make sure that there is equity and diversity, and that we get a space domain that works for everybody. And again, harking back to Thunderbird's goal of being a global organization, that's going to be key to what we do. So we're going to have a very globalized cohort, and Timmy will be fantastic in helping us address that. I'm looking forward to teaching the space policy and law course with her. Our dean, Sanjeev Kagram, is, wow, I don't even know where to start. He's one of the most inspiring and passionate individuals that I have ever worked with, an expert in the fourth industrial revolution. And he actually identified that space was probably the most exciting and least properly addressed area of 4IR, and brought me and Zahir in and launched this program. And, it was just amazing to watch, because at the other schools I've been with, I tried to get them to do this. Since saw it, Thunderbird saw it. We had cover from the very top at ASU, and the thing came off in record time and with record quality. And I'm just so totally excited. I also want to say industry is on board. They love this idea of getting a new pipeline of space leaders, particularly a more diverse pipeline of space leaders. I had my Thunderbird students out at Virgin Orbit just last week, where Will Pomerantz took us around and showed us what they were doing, and really inspired us with their vision. The Florida Tech ISU group with Andy and I, we were just out at ULA's facility at the Cape, and Space Force was kind enough to give us a really nice tour of their whole launch facilities as well. Took students to Rocket Lab last week as well. And I can just tell you, just about every company is like, yes, please, how can we move forward with this? It's an exciting time to be in this industry. So with that said, have I stopped sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Let me see if there are any questions. Can you stump me on something, Michael?
I don't think I can stump you, but I'm happy to ask the questions. How are you, Greg? Good?
I'm excellent. I love talking about this stuff. So thank you for giving me a forum, and always good to talk to you and Lee.
You've been involved with the Foundation for the Futures events, I think 4 times now, if I'm counting right. So we really appreciate you being a regular contributor and being involved here. So I want to ask, who's going to this school, right? Who do you want to show up, and what's the skill that they're going to walk away with? Right.
So what you got is, we need leaders. And by leaders, I mean, we need vice presidents, directors of these companies, people who will move up into the C-suite, right? And there's pretty much 2 paths I see coming in here. One is engineers within the existing companies that would like to move up into leadership or get forced into leadership. And this happens a lot in government programs. And I want to be clear, we're training leaders for those too. But it's why Jim Bell and Lindy are excited to talk to us, because all of a sudden you go from being a researcher and you fill out this NASA, application, and suddenly you're a manager and you're managing a giant program with a budget and hundreds or maybe thousands of people working on it. And you're like, oh my God. So there's those folks, right? The folks that have the engineering skill set, understand the domain, need to be given finance, leadership, accounting, and the normal business skills that you get from a business master's degree, but in the context that's appropriate in the space context. The other group is, we've got a lot of people coming in from Silicon Valley or from Wall Street or wherever, saying, I want to be part of this commercial space boom. They've gotten it, right? In the last 18 months, suddenly it's the new religion, and they're throwing money in, and it's like, oh, we're going to do another space launch company. And, I kind of want to help them see that there's a much broader picture here than yet another space launch company. Not that there aren't a bunch of great ones, but we all know that there's more to do, and you might be better off putting your money somewhere else. So these folks, investors from Silicon Valley and Wall Street, need education in this, right? Second or thirdly, we've got folks from the tech sector who have been managers. They've worked at Google, they've worked at Apple, they've worked at Samsung or whatever, and they're shifting into the space industry because the jobs are hot and they pay really well and the excitement is there, right? Yeah, the tech industry is kind of getting old now. It's not as exciting as it was when they were young, but you go to the space industry and it's like you have that same feeling. People are doing crazy, wild things, and I want to be part of that. So those folks are going to learn the space context while they hone their management skills. And, frankly, anybody else, people coming out of the military, out of the Air Force or Space Force that want to go into the commercial sector and need the business school are great opportunities. People from around the world that are working for their government that now has an interest in doing something in space. We're getting a lot of excitement from Dubai and the UAE, where Thunderbird has offices. And Thunderbird has offices in DC, Seoul, Tokyo, London, Geneva, Moscow, Dubai, and I'm probably forgetting some. I know we're opening in Australia soon. But anyway, those folks from all over that just want to be part of the ecosystem and like, how do I catch up, right? So we're going to teach you the space context, what's an orbital inclination, how does the rocket equation work without calculus, right? But so that these business leaders have the grounding to make intelligent decisions and don't base their judgments from what they saw in a sci-fi movie.
I've been seeing people, I refer to them as armchair physicists for the last 20 years, right? The people that try to tell professionals how space works. And it always, I mean, I enjoy their enthusiasm, but they're just wrong, and it's hard to get that across. I know
we want to teach them when to know what they don't know.
Exactly right. Exactly. So I know you have a really hard stop here in just a moment, literally a minute, but can you do a quick compare contrast between your program and ISU's? I'm thinking the master's program, not the summer session or the Florida program that you run.
Yeah, so we're really the only program that's running a full management, essentially MBA equivalent program that is both global and oriented at the space industry. It's the only one where you're going to get leading faculty that are working, in the space industry. Otherwise, you can get a certificate on top of a degree. But right now, we're the only one. I expect the rest of the country to catch up, and I know there's excitement in other locations as well. I just posted the link there.
School of Mines is going to do a specialty in resource extraction, things like that. There are specialist programs.
There are UT Permian Basin is looking at something. I know that UT Brownsville too. And but anyway, I think we have the best organized and executed. And if you want to be a space executive in January of 2023, we're ready to go. It's a one-year program. Goncalo asked, what does it cost? It costs $67,000. There are scholarships from our school, which will help cut that cost down for you. And we're working with industry to get some full scholarships, particularly for underrepresented folks and veterans.
Terrific. I'm really excited about this. I tried building an MBA program for ISU, I think in 2014, and it was deemed, quote, premature. So
it was exactly on time, Michael.
Many years later, I'm super glad that y'all are doing this because it has been a hole in the market for a long time. So good for you, Dr. Autry. Really excited about your program. Have a great day, sir.
I hope to see you as a guest speaker. Thank you. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. All right, that was a great, exciting update and a great statement of the problem. I think Greg's had a lot of experience explaining to people why there's a need for such a program, and now it's a reality thanks to his efforts and those of many others over the years. Just a reminder, Greg helped us get that sponsorship for our Saturday Space program. So thank you again to that program within ASU, where our next speaker is from. To the rest of our audience, if you'd like to become a sponsor to help cover the cost of this programming, simply add a sponsorship to your order when you register for our next event, and we'll be in touch with you for graphics and your selections of what exactly you wanted to sponsor. Andrew Maynard. Dr. Andrew Maynard is a professor and associate dean in Arizona State University's College of Global Futures, an elected fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science, and author of the books Film for the Future and Future Rising. In addition to his academic work, Andrew co-hosts the podcast Mission Interplanetary with former NASA astronaut Katie Coleman. His work focuses on the future and how our actions in the present impact it, including the ethical development and use of new technologies. He's also a delightful conversationalist, so we all get to hear his stories today. Thank you for being here, Andrew.
This is great. Thank you so much, Lee, for that. And I'm assuming I'm coming through loud and clear.
We can hear you just fine.
Excellent. So I guess you get a double dose of Arizona State University, and it's great to follow on from what Thunderbird are doing here. That's just a fantastic program. I was going to start off by saying, and now for something completely different, and yet in some ways, it's not, because what I want to talk about really does tie in with the workforce and really sort of moving forwards in the business of space and space business, but from actually probably a different perspective than many of you come across it. And it's from the perspective of looking at what we refer to these days here as orphan risks, the sorts of things that are likely to trip you up, but we tend not to think about. But before I get there, I should say a little bit more about myself, so you know how and where on earth I'm coming from and why I'm talking about what I'm talking about. We talked about armchair scientists. I actually started life as a physicist and spent most of my formative years as an academic as a physicist studying aerosols. But for the last, I guess, 15, 20 years, my focus has been on emerging technologies. Early on, it was nanotechnology and engineered nanomaterials, but these days it covers a plethora of different technologies, but not just from the technology perspective, also from the social perspective and policy perspective. And as part of that, I've become increasingly interested in two things. One is, where are the unexpected risks that lie between a great idea and its execution? And secondly, how do we ensure that emerging technologies and innovation more generally truly does serve society? And when I talk about serving society, I mean, how does it help us build a more vibrant future, a future that's more full of promise? And of course, this is what we're doing when we're looking at space exploration and humans in space. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that are potentially going to stop us getting there. The third thing I want to say here is I do wear another hat. And as Lee mentioned, I'm Associate Dean for Student Success in Arizona State University's College of Global Futures. And there are lots of ways of interpreting what student success means, but one of those ways is we want our students to A, get a job, B, have a career, not just a job, and C, change the world through that, which means that I am deeply committed to understanding what those career pathways are and how to actually open them up. And more importantly, how to make sure our students have got the skills that they need to succeed in, especially the commercial world. So with that, let me talk a little bit about risk. And some of this is going to connect with space. Some of it isn't, but it's going to be space relevant. And as Lee mentioned, I do stuff around space, but also I think much more broadly here. So this is a story that actually starts several years ago when I was at the University of Michigan. So I mentioned I've worked a lot with tech innovation. I was part of the formation of University of Michigan Masters in Entrepreneurship, which was a venture between the College of Engineering and the business school. It ran for a few years and then ran into some problems. But I was brought in because somebody in their wisdom thought that I knew something about ethics. I'm not entirely sure I know that much about ethics, but I do ask difficult questions around tech innovation. So in running this course on ethics, I realized a couple of things fairly early on. And this was a course where we had master's level engineering students who wants to set up their own businesses. I realized that ethics really isn't a great thing to be talking about with these students, but I also recognize that there are things that they needed to know that they just didn't get from either the business environment or the engineering environment. And that is how to succeed in an increasingly complex social environment. And it was very clear from these students, and this is clear through all of my career working with entrepreneurs and startups, pretty much all of them had this vision of making the world a better place. Of course, money played a role here, but money wasn't the driving factor. It was actually achieving something bigger than that. And usually it was in a vision to improve people's lives somehow. And yet it was also very clear that they were very naive in terms of how society worked, which meant that they could have great tech, but they were destined to fail at the first hurdle because they hadn't thought through the broader ramifications. And this got me realizing that there is a deep need here, not for teaching ethics, although ethics are important, but helping people understand a risk landscape that goes beyond the usual stuff that we talk about, which typically involves, are you going to kill people? Are you going to harm the environment? Are you going to lose money? There's a lot more to it. And it includes things like, Are you going to threaten people's sense of self-identity? Are you going to run up against perceptions that people hold, which they may be wrong, but they can still create barriers? And so through this, we began to create an approach to things that we call risk innovation. And the innovation here is asking, can we think creatively and innovatively about risk? And the answer is yes, we can. And so for the last several years, a lot of my work has been involved with this idea of asking, what happens if we think about risk as either the protection of value, the protection of what we consider to be incredibly important, or empowering us to build what is of value? And the idea here is that a risk is anything that threatens that value or that value growth. And that value growth may be making a better world. It may be going to Mars. It may be developing a plan B. It may be just respecting other people and giving them the possibility, the opportunity to be the person they want to be. And it turns out that when you begin to think about risk in this way, a lot of avenues open up and a lot of pathways to succeeding that we don't usually see. So I'll tell you just one story here. It's actually a case study that we ran on where things failed. And again, it's not to do with space, but you can see the parallels with space enterprises. And some of you may have heard about this particular case. It was a company called Predictive that launched a few years ago. And this was a company that had a fantastic idea. They recognized there was both a problem and an opportunity in the marketplace. The problem was parents who wanted trustworthy, reliable babysitters. And the opportunity was developing an app using machine learning that would allow them to screen out babysitters and identify the ones that are more trustworthy. And the technology that they used was a technology that just scraped the social media feeds of these potential babysitters and gave them a ranking effectively of who was trustworthy, who wasn't. Great idea. What parent would not want this? Apart from the fact that the Washington Post ran an article on this and people reading it, they went straight to the invasive side of scraping social media and coming to a conclusion about somebody's character. And there was such a backlash to this invasiveness, this invasion of privacy, that the company had stopped trading and they went under. Now, what interests me here is this was a great company with a great idea to make people's lives better, but they were utterly naive when it came to understanding the social landscape and social risks that they were operating in. Because they didn't understand that, they made serious errors that they could have avoided that ended up with them going under. So the question then is, if you're looking at any other enterprise, how do you identify those things that you maybe aren't thinking about because you've had a business or an engineering training and yet are likely to pull the rug out from under your feet? And this comes to the work we do around risk innovation, and specifically the work we do in ASU's Risk Innovation Nexus. Sorry, I haven't got the slides. You just have to watch my face or be distracted by my background rather than looking at pretty ASU designed slides. But if you want to check out the website riskinnovation.org, riskinnovation.org, it has a lot of information there. We actually set out with realizing that this is a major problem with businesses and decision makers to come up with a tool that would help people be able to make smarter decisions around their business, around their technology, with just an hour or so of engagement with this tool. We were very naive. We thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a tool where if we just had 30 minutes with a founder or a CEO, it would just change the way they saw the world and they'd be able to identify these orphan risks and navigate around them. And we came up with a 2-page planner. And then we discovered as we began to road test this that it takes a little bit more than 30 minutes to go through this. However, we do have a system where we've seen time and time again that just going through the process of thinking about what you might do that is likely to raise these orphan risk hurdles, you can change your mindset very, very quickly and see opportunities for doing things differently. And so this has been very exciting, and we've been working with a number of organizations on how to do this. But we have reached a challenge, and the challenge is, how do you get people who are trying to use business approaches and new technologies to make the world a better place understand that there's another dimension they need to see and be aware of as they make those decisions? We can do this to a certain degree through training, but there are a lot of people out there that don't have access to that. So this ties in with another side of what I do that Lee touched on, which is doing a lot of public communication and a lot of writing. And 2 or 3 years ago, I asked myself the question, if I was to reach as many people as possible to get them to start thinking differently about this really complex social landscape around technology innovation, what's the best way of doing it? The first answer was write a popular book. Forget about those boring academic books that nobody buys. Write a book that somebody actually wants to read. And secondly, and perhaps rather naively, it was find a hook that's going to excite people. And the hook that I came to was science fiction movies. Little did I know that it's actually harder to get people excited about science fiction movies than I thought. I thought everybody would just love this. But I went ahead and wrote the book. I actually have a copy here if you're interested in it. It's Films from the Future, the Technology and Morality of Sci-Fi Movies, which is a really clunky title. It's what my editors thought would sell well. I'm not sure it was the greatest idea. The working title was actually, if you'll forgive the language, The Moviegoer's Guide to Not Effing Up the Future, which I think would have sold much better, but they didn't go for it. But the idea is you take science fiction movies. First of all, science fiction movies are really, really bad predictors of the future, understandably, because they're about storytelling, they're about entertainment. But if you approach them in the right way and with the right mindset, they are incredibly good ways of understanding the social connections between technology in the future. And they do that because science fiction movies are almost always stories about people and society and what goes wrong when you inject technology there. And if you approach them in the right way, you can use them to gain really deep insights into A, what might go wrong around these orphan risks associated with technology and society, and B, how to actually avoid making serious mistakes and get to where you're going. So I'm just going to give you one example out of the book. The book contains 12 science fiction movies. Some of them are very well known, like Jurassic Park. Some of them are not well known at all, like the anime version of Ghost in the Shell. But all of them have different perspectives to bring to how we innovate effectively. And because this is science fiction, a number of them actually connect with space. So we have Elysium there, which is actually a movie about economic and social disparity. And we have Contact there, which is actually, okay, a side anecdote, Contact is one of my favorite movies in the book because it allows us to explore the nature of science and evidence and belief and wonder when it comes to not only science, but exploration. My editors actually told me, 11 great movies, why have you got Contact? Surely this is just make-believe. And I couldn't believe it because as a scientist, Contact is the scientist's movie. It's the movie that gets the heart of what it is to be a scientist. But the movie I want to talk about very briefly is actually an old British movie from 1951, 1952. I forget the exact date. But it's a movie called The Man in the White Suit, which I would be surprised if any of you have seen it. One or two of you may have done. It's an old Alec Guinness comedy. This is Alec Guinness before his Star Wars fame. And it's a story about a brilliant inventor who was actually a material scientist who had this vision of creating a new textile that was virtually indestructible. It was so strong you couldn't break it, and it was utterly stain resistant. No matter what you did with it, it wouldn't stain. And I love the story because even though this was early 1950s, the story deeply resonates with what we were trying to do with engineered nanomaterials back in the early 2000s, when people were very excited about being able to engineer materials at the atomic scale that were incredibly strong and stain resistant. As it is, the movie isn't about nanotechnology, it's about synthetic chemicals and synthetic textiles. But what I love about this movie, it's about a scientist who is convinced that he has the secret to a better future. And in his mind, the secret to a better future is never having to change your clothes. And he is so committed to this that he finds ways of working on this particular problem. He discovers his new textile. He tries to convince this textile firm to buy into it, and then everything goes wrong. And it goes wrong because people suddenly realize that if you've got clothes that never wear out, the bottom falls out of the market. people lose their jobs, people lose their revenue. So he had management against him, he had the unions against him, even his landlady, who made a bit on the side by washing clothes, was against him, saying, what am I going to do when there are no clothes to wash? And the moral of the story, and this is pulled out in the book, is no matter how good your intentions, if you're just focused on the science, you just focus on the technology, and you forget about people and society and how they work, you're gonna fail. And it's incredibly important that you understand this really complex dynamic in society where social barriers can actually stop you doing the good that you're trying to achieve. And the more you understand that social landscape, the more likely you are to actually achieve your ends. And of course, this comes back to thinking about not only workforce and developing the industrial base around going into space and humans in space, but thinking about what sort of people do we need in this workforce? Do we need the Sydney Strattons of the world? This was the Alec Guinness character who is just focused on doing the best possible science. Or do we need those people that also understand the complexities of the social environment we live in and can navigate companies through that? So that was a lot of fun writing the book. I actually use this in a course with students. It's a really popular course, as you would imagine, because we get to sit around and watch movies every semester. But the important thing here is beyond the movies, the more we think about innovative ways of understanding these orphan risks that we face with any sort of endeavor or any sort of enterprise, the more likely we are to succeed. With that, I've said quite a lot, so we should probably allow a little bit of time just to see whether there are any questions or continue the discussion.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Greg Autry's discussion of risk tolerance, and he showed Howard Hughes and Lockheed,
Yep.
and said that great entrepreneurs have a very high risk tolerance. And you're in the business of bringing them down to earth in a way by pointing out here are all these different kinds of risks beyond just the market or the investor risk. You're bringing in a whole ecosystem of risk understanding.
Right.
Have you seen a phenomenon where they just get so disheartened when you're illuminating this, and how does that affect the business?
So actually, no, this is one of the challenges that we face with this whole approach. The first thing I would say is I'm not sure I fully agree with Greg. I think there is an appearance of risk tolerance, but I think successful entrepreneurs are incredibly savvy in terms of the bets that they make on risk. Nobody is stupid enough just to close their eyes and just hope for the best. They have a calculus there. It's just that their calculus may not be the same as our calculus. However, we have found in working with companies that there are so many startups where the C-suite team desperately want to do the right things, but the more they think about it, the more they get bogged down in the problems. And it's really easy to brainstorm and come up with 101 reasons why things won't work. And that just stymies everything. So one of the things that we did with our approach and our technique is to force people to just look at 2 or 3 things. So to give you an example of that, the process we would take people through is, rather than just let them stew in their own fears, is say, once you know or you've got a good idea of what you want to do and where you want to go, first of all, think about your key stakeholders. Obviously, there's you as the enterprise, but also there's your investors, there are your customers, and there are the communities around you. Secondly, think about just 3 things that are of value to each of those stakeholder groups. No more than 3, because more than 3 gets you really bogged down. And then once you've identified those areas of value, think about the orphan risks, and we've got a list of 18 specific orphan risks which potentially threaten those areas of value. So now you've gone from an open-ended problem which is intractable to a closed problem which is highly tractable, because if you can identify just 3 or 4 areas where you can do better to begin to reduce those risks, you've got a pathway forward. And then the final step of this is just asking people to identify 2 or 3 next steps. Don't go off in the deep end, but just think about the small things you can do to get a little bit further and then reiterate. But yes, if you don't do that, we find people either ignore the risks if they're hard-headed, or if they're, I was going to say, if they're sensitive, I'm not sure that's the right word, but if they really care about these things, it's so easy for them to get so bogged down they can't see the way out of the morass.
Yeah, we have had a saying in the oil and gas industry: any idiot can kill a prospect.
There we are.
Yeah. I'm getting, let's see, a few questions. What do you think about the Silicon Valley use of the word disruption versus transformation?
Oh, interesting. It really depends on who you are and the context, and the trends in language. So I would actually step back and say, whatever language Silicon Valley use, it's the bigger issue is attitudes and process and intent. And I'd say that because disruption versus transformation can just be different words for the same sort of thing. What is really important from both a business success perspective and a social success perspective, and by social success, I mean actually building a better future for people, is your intent. What are you trying to do? What are you seriously trying to do? And what are you seriously willing to do to build a better society? And then we can start talking about the types of words you use and what exactly you mean. But just change for change's sake, whether it's transformation or disruption, doesn't actually get us as a society to where we need to be. There's got to be a bigger vision.
Yeah, there's a lot of wheel spinning.
Yes.
I'm just going to read a comment. I'm not sure if it's a question yet. Man in the white suit sounds a lot like a root of some objections to propellant depots, which we had a panel on yesterday. Don't have to throw away expensive vehicles after one use. So yeah, people are seeing live applications. And then Dave Huntsman, who has good comments throughout the day, he points out that Machiavelli wrote about this problem in The Prince.
Yep.
Established interests, and not putting a damper on things.
And actually, that's a great connection, because I'm not saying anything new here. We know this. It's just that often we forget it. And sometimes I think we need to be teaching our students to sort of understand the breadth of thinking that's gone before, rather than narrowing them down.
Wonderful. Michael in the comments has mentioned nanotech. How did this inform your thoughts on risk? Nanotech ideation and research that Congress assigned to you.
So yes, as Michael knows, I'd spent many years at the forefront of thinking around nanotechnology and risk. And for a number of years, my role was science advisor to what was known as the Project on Emerging Nanotechnologies at the Woodrow Wilson Center in DC, which is a think tank. It's a pseudo-government think tank. And our charge was understanding the environmental, the human health, and the social implications of nanotechnology and how we navigate this. So I was very involved in asking questions about what could possibly go wrong and how we get it to go right. And I'll be very upfront here and say my thinking changed quite dramatically over a space of about 10 years or so. And I'd say that because as nanotech began to become a thing in the early 2000s, late 1990s, there were a lot of concerns around what are the potential risks of creating a material that we've had no previous experience of? Are we going to create the next asbestos, to put it bluntly? And so there are a lot of really important questions to ask about what are the consequences of what we're doing. As time went on, it became very clear that a lot of those questions weren't necessarily the right questions. And we still need to be really careful with what we do with materials, how we put them together in different ways, but we need to be really smart with what is off the table in terms of a new risk versus how we formulate questions around new risks. Sadly, I think the whole question or the whole conversation around risks in nanotechnology got derailed because people got so obsessed with the world being so different below 100 nanometers that they thought that something down there is going to kill us all. The reality is the physics says actually there aren't sharp transitions. There are some really interesting things that happen which give us access to new properties. But when it comes to human health impacts and environmental impacts, things are not so black and white. So yes, what I took away from that was we have to be much smarter in terms of the questions we ask. We may need to be much more willing to change our perspective based on the evidence and not just stick to what we assume is the problem. And we need to be able to recognize what is truly a problem versus what is an assumed problem.
Mhm.
I really wish those lessons had transferred over to many other areas of tech innovation.
Yeah, it's sort of bringing you, even though that was a specific project, it's getting a little bit more of that macro view of some of the key problems for industry.
That's right. And I would just add, any sort of new technology comes with risks. And I seriously don't want to discount the risks here, but we need to make sure we ask the right questions, because if we go down the rabbit holes of the wrong questions, we're never going to get anywhere.
Old technologies come with risks also,
Yes.
that don't ever really go away.
Right. And actually, I'm sorry, I gotta say one thing to that. So on that particular point, and this is actually fairly integral to risk innovation thinking, and it's something I tell my students. So often when we think about risk, we think about how we eliminate risk. But the reality is, risk is part and parcel of life. The only way you can be risk-free is to be dead. That's the long and short of it. And we don't want to be that. So we have to learn how to live with risk. It's not a case of getting rid of risk, but it's learning how to live with it and live with it effectively and pragmatically.
That's so true. Yeah. Talk, now that we're sort of on that macro scale, talk space specifically just for a minute, because I do have one final question for you. And what are some of the key things that the space industry you think is missing in recognizing risk?
So I would actually come back to the social risks again. Space industry, just by the very nature of it, is very keyed in with traditional risks around harming the environment, harming people. There is another layer of risks there that we're just beginning to deal with. So space debris is as an obvious one. As space and the muck in space becomes sort of more crowded, how do we navigate around that? But the biggest challenges are going to be the political and policy challenges. How do you navigate sort of moving forward with space in a really complex and convoluted policy environment? And secondly, the social challenges. How do you get public trust and public buy-in for what you're attempting to do? And I think any company that doesn't take the policy question and the social question seriously is really going to flounder.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful advice. Heard a lot from various experts on space traffic management about the challenges of even deciding who's in charge of regulating it. They've built for 10 years just having arguments about, well, you're in charge now. You're going to regulate this. No, you. And so it's not even, it's a layer before even being able to make any regulation.
Right.
As a final question, I want to ask you to tell us more about the Mission Impossible podcast and maybe a favorite guest or conversation that you've had.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. So yes, Mission Impossible podcast actually comes out of, sorry, did I say Mission Impossible? I always fall into that trap. Mission Interplanetary podcast comes out of ASU's Interplanetary initiative, which is, I think Greg might have touched on it because it touches on what Thunderbird is doing. It's a big initiative where we're looking at really transforming how we think about humans in space. But the podcast itself was set up as a series of conversations between myself and former astronaut Katie Coleman and our guests to explore different aspects of humans in space that maybe haven't been addressed in the same way before. So interestingly, and you can check it out on any podcast platform, we have far more women than you usually see in these interviews, which was something that I was very excited about, to get that different perspective on what it means to be humans in space. And we had conversations around fairly common things like space debris, but also questions about, should we send an all-women team to Mars, for instance? The conversation that I think I loved the most was one that might be unexpected, and it's one on decolonizing space with Natalie Trevino, who recently just graduated with her PhD. And I love the conversation because Natalie is deeply enthusiastic about space and humans in space, and yet deeply concerned that we don't make the same mistakes of the past where the West has colonized countries and we're still dealing with the legacy of those problems. So it's a conversation about thinking differently about our presence in space. And it was one of those conversations where I learned as much as I sort of gave into the conversation. But I would encourage everybody to check out the Mission Interplanetary podcast. It was a blast making it. And I'm really pleased and really proud, actually, with what we produced there.
That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to following that, and I'm sure our audience will see how easy you are to talk to and look forward to that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to have you, and we'll have to get an update down the road.
Absolutely. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Michael. He made the introduction for us. Next up, we have the winners of the New Space Business Plan competition. Very excited to hear who the judges have nominated as their winner. Thomas, why don't you come on and let us know what you all talked about, the secret confab on a separate console, and let us know how this turned out.
Okay, I get all my notes out here. It was an interesting conversation, but at the end of it, one team did emerge. All the teams, the judges felt that all the teams were worthy of funding of some kind, worthy of attention in their respective areas, their respective markets. But one company in particular stood out about a head above the rest because they offered just a great example of a really well done investor pitch. They knew their market, they knew where they fit into their ecosystem. They had a good discussion and focus on the conversations with their customers and offered substantial benefits and solutions for their customers. They'd already raised some funds, which gave them a good start and some traction and some embracing capital from outside sources. They already had some commitments to customers, and they have a good overall team business experience. They were in fact impressed with the initial outreach and commitments that they've made so far. And it's in a very viable market sector. I mean, starting a company like this is difficult, but they all felt that the team for this company is really well positioned to grow maybe exponentially. So having said all that, the winner of this quarter's all virtual New Space Business Plan competition is Esper Satellite Imaging from Melbourne, Australia.
Bravo!
I don't know if they're here because it's about 5:30 in the morning there now. They're probably getting some much deserved sleep. As I told them in my email to them this morning, it says, given all the time zone differences, you need not be present to win.
That's great. Yeah, I think we've talked several times throughout the day about technology transfer and the value of terrestrial applications to business plans, and that was one where they seem to know their market and how that could benefit life on Earth. Yeah,
so they get the win. They get a few bragging rights, and they get a lovely $5,000 check, courtesy of our sponsors, Foundation for the Future. Thank you, Tim, so much for helping us put this thing on and making it. We're trying to make it better and better every time. And so I'm really enjoying this experience. I hope you are too.
Yeah, no, and definitely a deserving company. Really liked their pitch and excited to see where they go from here.
And this is why this is part of what we want to do too. And in future events, we want to really keep tabs on the people who have been through the program and see how well they're doing and where they're going and what kind of traction they're getting going forward. So yeah, it was a really great time. I'm sorry that one company couldn't join us today. That would have made the judge's job even harder. But maybe if we're lucky, we'll get them to come in November. So
absolutely, yeah.
The only other thing, coming events, we're still working. I can't really formally announce it yet, but we are working on a live BPC event for International Astronautical Congress in Dubai in late October, and we'll see how that goes. And if things come together the way I hope they will, very, very soon now, we'll be able to make an announcement, and we'll let you guys know, so you can make the announcement to all your followers as well. And you never know what we're going to get out of that one. That's it could be very interesting. And of course, our own event here at Conversations for the Future will take place in November, and I'll be sending up the signups and everything and the information for that probably within the next 2-3 weeks. So stay tuned for that at cscf.space. I will put that in the chat. So everybody has the link. Okay, there you go. Unless you have questions, that's all I got. Congratulations to Esper Satellite Imager.
Tim,
And for everybody else.
Do you have any celebratory words for Tom and the judges?
Just congratulations to Esper Satellite Images. It's like I said, really a well done presentation. They've got a solid product, and I really like the rotating cast of judges you're bringing, Tom. High caliber people every time, and it's awesome to be able to get different perspectives rotating through. So
like I say,
thank you so much.
Thank you. This is the 20th BPC that we've done.
Thanks.
Over an 11-year period. So, and we're almost at a milestone. I think we're coming really close. I'm gonna have to do the math again. I think we're getting really close to the $400,000 mark of funds awarded to deserving teams.
You'll have to do an all-star competition where your top winners come back and compete against each other for the major title.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to add a 0 onto the prize, though.
Probably.
Just to give them some incentive. I'm just saying.
Yeah, maybe a where are they now is more of a draw than having them compete again if they're all out there being successful in the world.
That's true too.
Yeah.
I'd rather they be out there and be successful in the world. I'd rather have maybe a panel discussion sometime where a lot of the winners can come back and sit down and share their war stories.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome. I think that would be great.
Yeah,
we've done that before in a live conference. I think it would just be an excellent thing to do. If you guys would consider that, that would be marvelous.
Yeah.
I'll book it for November. That's great.
Okay, well, even better. Okay.
All right. Well, this ties many of the discussions that we had today about entrepreneurship and the workforce pipeline, allowing people to thrive in space business as well as in space. Thank you so much for bringing the new Space Business Plan competition to our venue, Conversations for the Future, and we are looking forward to November already.
Oh, it's my pleasure to do it. It's a joy for me.
Great. Well, this marks the end of Conversations for the Future Workforce and Industrial Base. We had great discussions both on screen and in the chat. It's always lively over there. And on September 8 and 9, which is a Wednesday and Thursday next time rather than a Tuesday and Wednesday because of Labor Day, we'll be back with Conversations for the Future, Space Garbage, Recycling, and Sustainability. Finally, as you bask in the afterglow of these 2 days of engaging and informative conversations, take a cue from the Thunderbird School of Management's Executive Master of Global Management in Space Leadership, Business, and Policy, and consider sponsoring our next event. I am Lee Steinke with Foundation for the Future, and I look forward to seeing you in September.